Hello friends, this is Luke, and I want to address a concept that is very commonly misunderstood, and that is duality. So yogic duality is kind of a big deal. In fact, if you read the Yoga Sutras in the middle of chapter 2, it essentially states that all ignorance comes from a lack of an understanding of the dualistic nature of our lives, our reality as humans. So it's kind of a big deal. And if you want to do, like most people probably do yoga more for the physical than anything. But after a long time of that, either you're going to get old and you're not going to be able to do as much physical, or you're just naturally going to migrate probably towards some of this sort of deeper cosmic existential stuff. So generally speaking, when people hear duality, they think that they mean like their mind and their body, and that's not what it means in yoga philosophy at all. So mind and body in yoga philosophy are essentially the same exact thing. They are like your physical, energetic, material body, or what's called prakriti, your nature, your genetics, your blood, flesh, and bones, and thoughts come from there. Now, consciousness manifests through the brain, which we would say, well, that's your mind, and something like that, and that's not physical, but let's not get too carried away. The basic premise of this is kind of confusing, and it's that if you can see it, it's one piece of reality. If you can touch it, I wouldn't say if you can imagine it, because the act of imagining would be nature and prakriti and physical, or phenomenal, let's use that instead of physical. But what you are imagining could in fact be something that is not in the phenomenal world. So what I mean by that is think about like the periodic table of the elements. Okay, so just bear with me here. Duality, 1, 2. The first one is prakriti. So I'm here at this little creek that I really like, and see these rocks? This is prakriti. This is nature. It's all prakriti. So prakriti, the way to tell if it's prakriti is that it's sensory perceptible. You can see it, touch it, taste it, smell it. You can dwell there. It's wonderful. This little creek is so beautiful. It's a marvel. But it is following a set pattern, and it's following laws and physics. So think of it like the periodic table of the elements. This is energy that is working, energy and matter phenomena that is interplaying with each other. In yoga philosophy, to summarize, that part of the world is dead, meaning that it is not laced with consciousness. In fact, according to yoga philosophy, it's very strongly dualist. So it's saying that like you really need to understand that if it is material or phenomenal, that it is not consciousness. It's not at all. It's devoid of consciousness. So as I look around, there's a slug. Oh, he moved. No, he's still there. There's a slug on this plant. The plant itself is prakriti, okay? The slug's body is prakriti, but the slug probably has consciousness. So, therefore, that consciousness is the other side, which is purusha. So, purusha is one term, and it's a very important term in yoga that can mean a lot of different things, but purusha essentially means yourself or your atman. It's what you are when you don't have a body. So most schools of yoga believe in reincarnation. You don't have to believe in reincarnation. That's not important at all. But one way or another, you're acknowledging, oh, there's that slug crawling on this rock. So this slug is making decisions, So that's another thing about consciousness, is that it's wild, it's unpredictable. And that's so intriguing because these rocks and this water must obey. That's the only thing it can do. It's amazingly predictable. Like, I mean, I realize saying nature is predictable is kind of an oxymoron, but essentially, here's a stonefly on this rock. See, he's flown up or crawled up on this rock and died there. Or no, didn't die actually, forgive me. And shed this skin and then became a flying stonefly. Stoneflies don't fly very well, but the point is that a living being or a sentient being, and I'm saying sentient not meaning reflecting of itself, but sentient meaning that it travels beyond, it has the consciousness. Sentient, well, I don't really know fully, but I'm trying my best here. So like sentient beings like that stonefly have some power of choice, some power of will, and that's the only way that any of this makes any sense, because if it's made of Prakriti, it must follow laws of physics. It must follow E equals mc squared. It must follow time, space, money. It follows everything. If it's Prakriti, it follows the rules. Consciousness is free. It's free and it is not bound by Prakriti. It's very important to understand that because yoga is alluding to that. So yoga acknowledges Prakriti for the purpose of Purusha. So whether or not that stonefly has a Purusha is like another topic, and I don't really want to get into it, but I'll just say some folks would say that, well, that stonefly can make actions that have positive or negative karma, and that can then create a future life that then they become a bird, and then perhaps a giraffe, and then maybe a human or a dolphin or something like that, like maybe some more evolved creature. That's one way of looking at it. You could also just say that consciousness is all just one big glob of consciousness, and it's just simply viewing things from different sentient beings, and that it's all one, that it is not separate. And then there are several ways to look at it. There's literally endless ways that you can perceive Purusha, but this is, to me, the important question for you, because if I'm saying this and you're like, hey, I've got some idea of what this weirdo's talking about, well, ask yourself this. Number one, do you think you have one that is distinct from others? So let's break it down like this. So I studied Zen a little bit, and in Zen, take like, Thich Nhat Hanh is probably a good example. He said, point blank, there is no Atman. So that's a common Buddhist belief. There's no Atman. So that's to say that if you really look close, there is no essential nature of you as an individual. That is an entire illusion. And Thich Nhat Hanh uses the story of the cookie dough, where human beings are made of consciousness, and that consciousness comes from the cookie dough, and the cookie dough goes onto the baker's plate, or the baking sheet. I don't bake. And then it makes cookies, and then the cookies all of a sudden look around and they all look different, and they start arguing about who's the better looking cookie. And it's a joke that he says, because it's like, you're all the same thing. So yoga tends to not think that. So yoga philosophy tends to be more on the side of like, you actually are singular, that you have a Purusha that when you die still is in existence, not in like a physical way, but it's still there. And you are responsible for that. In fact, that's maybe the only thing you're responsible for. So that's kind of a weird and lonely thing to think about. It's you got to be careful imposing rules on Purusha. That's kind of like the big no-no, is that a lot of folks try to interpret Purusha. The next thing you know, you're writing books about it, but books are Prakriti, and so you're explaining it with words that are Prakriti, and all of a sudden only a very small essence of what Purusha really is getting actually like sent through. So it's a very challenging thing to communicate with another person. But maybe through the practices of yoga, we just sort of like auspiciously find Purusha. Like that's the theory that's out there. So let's move on to something maybe more important. There's like levels of Purusha. So Elaine Danielou is a famous French scholar who is a Shivite, he's dead now, but he broke down Purusha into 3 levels. And he says that there's an individual Purusha that's with you while you're alive, and it essentially is your life force, energy, and maybe it's connected to your emotions or like these gut feelings or intuition and things like that. But it's based on your survival as a human, and so when you die, it disappears. That's the first one, the lowest form of Purusha, if you will. The next level would be a Purusha that is indestructible. So this is super key. If you really believe that in Purusha, you believe that it lasts forever, that it is eternal and it cannot be destroyed, That's a big deal. To think that you have an eternal individual Atman, self, soul, Purusha, that can't be destroyed is very big. And it makes sense that if one were to believe that they would be like a little bit taken aback about the responsibility that they have. So, especially if you believe in karma and cosmic revenge and stuff like that. So it'd be hard to believe something like that if you were a Christian, I think. It seems to me that the idea of having sin like sort of never go away, it sort of attaches to you and follows you from lifetime to lifetime is, well, I'll just say it. I think to a lot of Christians that I know, it would just seem like a little primitive, that viewpoint. So in Elaine Danielou's philosophy, there's a third Purusha. And that Purusha is essentially that all one, or you could call it Ishvara. It's this cosmic consciousness that has every single piece of awareness from the beginning to the end of at least humanity, but probably everything in the cosmos. So Ishvara is a very, very big point in yoga. And Ishvara could be translated as God. It's got like a godlike sound to it. So like Ishvara sounds like Shiva, sounds like Jehovah, sounds like a lot of sort of godlike deities. And then there's Ishvara, which is essentially the yogic concept of that power. So if you believe in something like that, then you essentially say, yes, I do have perhaps an individual Purusha, but that Purusha is a messenger. It's a small piece, and it relays messages back to this bigger thing, and that bigger thing, Ishvara, is actually the ultimate power that through the practice of Ishvara Pranidhana in the Yoga Sutras is that which you want to align your consciousness with. So instead of saying, well, I just want to align my consciousness with Purusha, so well, you already are doing that. So it's in the Yoga Sutras that the Purusha is already always there, always watching. So then it's like, well, what's the point? Right? There wouldn't be maybe much point if you didn't believe in something beyond that you could tap into. So kind of an important thing. So finally, my way of encouraging you, if you're one of my students, is to just decide if you think that it's all a bunch of bunk and you don't want to get into it, and that's fine. You maybe can come back to it later. But if you do have those ideas, I think it's really healthy to check in sometimes and ask yourself, like, what do I believe about this? And maybe you can say, I mean, you can totally be an atheist and be a yogi. In fact, yoga is probably like non-theistic, but Samkhya, the philosophy that it's founded on, is notably atheistic. And so there's no problem with that at all. But if you do practice yoga for some spiritual purpose and you feel that that purpose is higher than you, then consider Ishvara's meaning. What is it to you? And is it a word that denotes something that you already know? Perhaps you already use a term for it, Allah or what have you. And perhaps you have certain ways of of worshiping or being in service to or subservient or in yogic terms, like surrender to, or just be a servant to that power. So ask yourself if that is the way that you go about it, and that's going to really be a big part of your practice, because your bhakti, your devotion to that is super key. And then you can look at guides and teachers and gurus. If you're a Christian, you could look at Jesus, or if you're Muslim, you could look at Muhammad, or if you are a Hindu, you could look at any number of 1,000 different people. But you can have like an example, and you can say, well, my goal is to reach this point, but this particular human who, just like me, walked this path and reached this place, so I'm going to actually follow their example. So you're not worshiping that person, but rather you're channeling their example. And that, I think that jives perfectly well with Ashtanga. And human beings tend to need an example to know what to do. So I'm here alone at this little creek, and I was gonna jump in, but it's really late in the summer, and I can't, because there's not enough water. But it's so beautiful and so unique, and in a way, like, nature is the most wonderful thing, and in another way, it's this trap. And the only way that it's a trap is that you have to know that nature was created by consciousness, but it is not consciousness. And we want to make sure that you can do whatever you want, but enjoy nature and be a part of nature. We are healing with nature, our bodies, our minds. And I just love this little creek, and I love little places like this. And one day I'll be gone, and my body will be invested in plants somewhere, hopefully somewhere beautiful like this. But that's not all of me. There's a part of me that is one with this creek and with nature, but then there's a part of me that's notably distinct from that, and that mystery is very much the purpose of yoga and our philosophy. So yogic duality, Purusha, Prakriti, that they are notably distinct. Hari Bol, friends.